Stepping back from the FDA before I get started, as a former Senate staffer, I will say when you walk into those rooms tomorrow, as looking down on their phones as the staffers may be, you all have the most powerful tool that, having been on the other side of this, is a personal story. And when you walk in there, if they're not making eye contact with you, if they're not listening to you, pause a moment, let them get done with what they're saying and make eye contact with them. Oftentimes, they're in their own heads and they're cycling through a meeting after another, and just having been there, when you make that eye contact and you start to connect on your story or those you love story, that's when it really connects. So just a little shortcoming there. I'm here to talk about the Food and Drug Administration. So the FDA itself needs champions. Now that might seem a little odd for someone to be coming up here and saying, but the FDA is oftentimes seen as a black box by many organizations, by many individuals. The NIH is much more patient-friendly seeming on the outside. But once you get to know the FDA can be one of the most powerful partners for rare disease. They have some of the most exceptional scientists that are out there working, as we were talking about earlier, every day in these specific fields with a lot of knowledge. And they need partners within the advocacy community and within the patient community to not only help them with Congress and let Congress know when they're doing a good job, but also guide them. The biggest part of 21st Century Cures, this big piece of legislation that you've heard so much about, is patient-centered drug development. Where is all that happening? It's happening at the FDA. But the FDA is the drug development part. Pharma is the drug development part. They need the patient aspect of that. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about where within this process that you see here, this is a quick snapshot of, unfortunately, the length of time that the current drug development process takes. But within each of these bars and colors you see here are multiple opportunities for patients, real patients and their caregivers, to get directly involved in each of these stages. Now, many of these are more known to you than others, clinical trials and those different stages. However, there are different pieces of this that you as organizations, you as individuals can be a part of or can start your own with the FDA as your partner. So I'm just going to go through these very quickly because these are the known engagement opportunities at different points in the FDA process. So drug discovery. Obviously, patient advocates have worked tirelessly with industry and NIH to make incredible discoveries. There are so much more that can be done and needs to be done, and you all have spent good parts of your life and today talking about all those things. Obviously, clinical trials. The FDA plays an integral role in clinical trials, and that role is often overlooked because it's usually in the infrastructure stages. They're looking at the results of trials and determining whether a drug gets on the market. But what you can do, and I'll show you by an example later on, is really get involved in a specific trial that's happening or see a trial that's happening not in your disease state necessarily, but that can form and show a good model for perhaps how you can advocate for companies and others to join forces to get a trial done that might not have been done otherwise. The FDA itself has, I'm going to use the word traditional, engagement opportunities. So advisory committees are called by the different divisions, and these are very specific panels that are called to make decisions on drugs. Now, these have a patient advocate or a patient seat on them oftentimes that can play a very strong role in explaining to the FDA what a therapy would really mean for a patient. Patient-focused drug development meetings. The FDA, a couple of years ago, started setting a large series of these up, focusing on a wide range of different diseases. These were very successful. The FDA has continued to hold these meetings, and by statute, the statute is starting to run out on the amount of meetings, but they have indicated that they want to keep moving forward with these. So that's an opportunity to educate the FDA and really advocate for your specific disease setting to inform the agency of what's going on and what you see on the ground, because that's what they really want to get from these meetings. Now, the organization that I'm with, Friends of Cancer Research, we have cancer in our name, but we really focus on cancer as a case study. Because cancer, fortunately for us, has so much knowledge about the disease. And as the disease becomes rarer forms of cancer, we're building off of decades and decades of advocacy that really pushed the envelope early on, that we're now able to have more precision medicine and these discoveries being made. So our organization uses that case study of cancer, knowing that the science is most advanced in many cases with cancer, and works very closely with the FDA to help create solutions to some small problems, some large problems. And I'll give you just a few brief examples of how we've tackled issues all along that drug development pipeline that I showed you earlier. So the first is, you may have heard of this, you may have not, it's called the Breakthrough Therapy Designation at the Food and Drug Administration. So this is something we looked at, and we're talking to those in the community and drug developers and advocates and patients that were in trials. And there were trials that were occurring that there was exciting news coming out of really early on in that trial, yet it was very difficult for patients to get on that trial. There was control arms that people were put on. There was a New York Times story back in 2010 about two cousins with a rare form of cancer. One was on the control arm of the trial, one was on the experimental therapy. The cousin on the experimental therapy was seeing exceptional results while his cousin was quickly deteriorating. And the story was heart-wrenching and talking about how the cousin so desperately wanted his other cousin to get on that trial, was willing to give up his spot on that to let his cousin have a chance at this. And we saw that, and we were just like, something has to be done. So instead of going to Congress right away, we said, okay, let's gather the cancer community, and let's get the FDA in here and talk to them about how this process could be better. And so what we did was, you see here at the bottom in the purple, it's 1 year was a panel at a conference that created a white paper that we sat down with Senator Bennett, Hatch, and Burr, so two Republicans and a Democrat, got a piece of legislation, and that was passed into law within 1 year. And that was able to be done because we went to the agency, we figured out the agency, FDA, CDC, that was most pivotal in the problem that we saw. We worked with that agency to see what it would take from Congress to overcome that problem, and then went to Congress and gave them that. We gave them that win. And when you walk into anyone's office and you don't just have an ask, you have the answer, they're going to be really willing to get working on that. And they were very quickly, and I give all of the members, dozens of them that worked on this with us over the years, a lot of credit. And then within 1 year of that breakthrough designation being put into law, 100 applications, 38 designations, and 3 full approvals. And so as of recently, so this is of November, so there's been another one, so this is 52. There's been 52 breakthrough therapy designated products approved by the FDA. I mean, this is exceptional. And these are drugs that have up to 4 or 5 years shaved off what the traditional approval mechanisms has been. These are getting to patients and full access to patients, not just through trials. Another issue in that spectrum that we are looking at is clinical trials. So as we were discovering, we have genomic testing, we have all this promise of precision medicine, but we were talking to the companies and talking to patients that had, a very specific disease and a subset, and they knew it, but there were no trials for that. They were getting the genetic testing back, but the companies were saying these subsets, these small populations, it's too small for us to do a trial for that subset right now. It's just not going to happen. So we looked within lung cancer, which had some genetic markers, and we started talking to some of the labs that were doing the testing. We came across Foundation Medicine, which is up in Cambridge. And we thought, well, what if we go to these companies that we know have therapies out there and say, well, what if we create one home for all the patients to come through one test, and then we will disperse them onto the arm that they most likely are best to respond to? And what if we partner with all of these organizations and create a neutral space you keep your drug, you keep your information, but it allows patients access to those therapies. It allows you to test something that you wouldn't have been able to do because you're not setting up your own clinical trial infrastructure. And so they started to say yes, and you see up here the initial companies that joined us. And referencing Francis Collins, Dr. Collins has been fantastic in this, as has both previous FDA commissioners, in setting this up, in understanding that the drugs that come off this trial, this is a registration quality trial, which means these can be approved to get into patients. And all these companies were willing to do that and step up. The trial, as I explained, I'll skip over this study real quick, but the success of this is now there are 700 centers in the United States with LungMap, this clinical trial. There are 1,300 patients on this trial right now for rare small subsets of non-small cell lung cancer. These are all therapies that every company on our trial would admit that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So it's a mechanism for these companies that have therapies to put them out there without having to put a huge amount of financial risk on the line, but they're willing to give access and give the therapies a try and let patients have a try at those. And I will say this, we are at the large academic medical centers, but 80% of our patients are at community hospitals across the country that have access to LungMap because of the structure of this trial, that many clinical trials that are only at the major centers would be cost prohibitive and travel prohibitive. So I think that's been an incredible success and continues to evolve and serve as a model as the science progresses. So the last thing I'll talk about is we looked at the FDA itself and it was like, well, science is progressing. When was the last time the actual structure of the FDA had changed? And we looked at it hard and we met with a lot of people and it hadn't changed structurally very much how drugs, devices, biologics had changed since the age of the iron lung, and we just were baffled by this. And really looking to cancer again as a model, we thought, well, a patient doesn't go to a hospital and see their device center and their biologic center and their drug center. They go to a cancer center. They go to a cardiovascular center. Then why is the FDA reviewing these therapies that are now codependent on each other, drugs, diagnostics, biologics, all together are creating a full treatment for a patient? So why can't the FDA look like that? And so we started working on our own with the FDA on internal issues, and then this amazing advocate came along in Vice President Biden. And we had our first meeting with Vice President Biden and brought this up, and he slammed his hand down on the table and said, why the heck doesn't this work like this? Let's make this happen. So instantly, we got the best patient advocate you could find, and he attached this as part of his moonshot. And as this progressed quickly, it ended up being passed as part of 21st Century Cures. And this just started with a conversation with the agency itself to say, what could you do internally? How can you condense your activities and condense that brain power that you have there and not have these disparate centers? To give you a stark example, the division of drugs, if a drug is being reviewed with a biologic, those are two separate divisions at the FDA that their computer systems don't even talk to each other. So they would physically be walking files across the FDA campus up there in White Oak. So what you see here on the left is how the current process, now past process, of combination oncology products looked. So you see the application coming in, and then it's quickly divided. And excellent people in all these centers are spending a lot of time and effort, and they're all exceptional, but they weren't collaborating because there was physical barriers in between and other bureaucratic barriers. So what you see on the right is what the new Oncology Center of Excellence, as they're calling it, will look like, and it's beginning to be up and running. They named Dr. Rick Pazdur as its lead. He was the head of the oncology drug division. Now he'll oversee all. And when there's a combination product that comes in, it's going to go through that center like a patient would go through a cancer center, and like that treatment should be reviewed. And this, we feel, and the FDA feels, will really be a model, and they've already committed to doing this as a pilot to look at doing this in other disease settings, cardiovascular disease, and many other forms where the science is there with combination products. So I'll bring this to a quick conclusion in that one of my big passions was, okay, there's so much, like I said earlier, of patient-focused drug development, but it's so difficult to crack the FDA, to crack the drug development process and to really understand it. So Friends of Cancer Research is launching, and this is just happening, in this week and the weeks moving forward, progressforpatients.org. So it is an online learning community specifically targeted to the regulatory process. And it's self-guided. It allows advocates, patients, to learn about the regulatory process, whether it's to then go advocate for an individual at your local center to understand the process for yourself as you're going through it in a trial, or as you're talking to members of Congress about the pitfalls and the issues within the drug development process and how arduous it actually is when you're asking them for increased funding, et cetera. You can really get a grasp of that. So I would encourage, if anyone's interested in this process, please reach out and go to the website. But I use this as an example in that advocates need the knowledge and understanding the drug development process, because that's the end goal, right? I mean, you're developing incredible research at the NIH and all over the country, and you know what it's like on the ground. And if you're armed with even more information, you're even more powerful when you go into that room. If you have the FDA as a friend, the NIH as a friend, the CDC as a friend, you're going into that room with them behind your back too. And that's really powerful for those members of Congress to see you're engaged. You're not only engaged on behalf of the patients you serve, but you're engaged on behalf of the thousands of scientists that are working on your behalf, the thousands of survivors that are out there. And the more that you have behind you, the stronger your advocacy will be. So I just want to say thank you to you all for doing what you're doing tomorrow. It's awesome. Make eye contact, make them listen to you, put your hand on the table. That oftentimes works. But good luck, everyone, and thank you very much.